first time Rebecca Hall sank the shovel into frozen ground, the two men parked along the snowbank didn't even try to hide their laughter.
A greenhouse in January. That girl's building a tomb for her husband's money.
Maybe she thinks grief grows better under glass.
The words landed like stones, but Rebecca's hands didn't stop. The shovel bit again and again.
Let them laugh. Every inch of this trench is for you, Jack.
She had not asked for their opinion. She had not expected their help. But when David Morrow, who ran the co-op, rolled down his window and yelled out, the air turned colder.
Hey, Rebecca, that backhoe you wanted? I'd rather lend it to someone doing real farming, not a rich girl's burial plot.
Rebecca's jaw tightened. She drove the shovel deeper, the blade ringing against frozen clay. No response. Just the steady rhythm of grief turned into labor.
Waste of good ground, if you ask me.
You said this could work. I'll prove it.
3 months before she drove that shovel into frozen ground, Rebecca had stood at the edge of a different scar in the earth. Jack's tractor rolled on the back 40. By the time she reached him, the engine was silent and the sky indifferent. At the funeral, the insurance man pressed an envelope into her hand, a sum that felt like a ransom for a future they'd never share.
This money was for our land, for our plans, but now it's just paper.
A week later, she sat in the cab of his pickup, the air still smelling of him, and found the manual tucked behind the seat. It was a 1970 S Colorado farmstead manual, dog-eared to a page titled Passive Solar Greenhouse for Winter Harvest.
He always said we should build a greenhouse that could survive the frost. Said it was the only way to be free.
Inside the cover, in Jack's handwriting, Rebecca, if something happens, build this. The land can't be the only thing that holds your heart.
Every cent of the insurance. For this. That's what you wanted, isn't it?
She closed the manual and stepped out into the first snowfall of the season, carrying all the weight of the dead into the living cold. The morning after she found the manual, Rebecca drove the old pickup to the Morrow County Co-op. She needed a backhoe.
I'd like to lease the backhoe, just for a week.
For what? That glass tomb you are screaming about. Waste of time and steel.
It's a passive solar greenhouse. No fuel needed. The manual shows.
Manual? Your husband had plans too. They didn't work. The co-op can't support fantasies.
Don't let him see you crack. This is for Jack, not for him.
The backhoe stays here. My equipment, my rules.
She didn't ask again. She turned on her heel, walked past the farmers loitering by the seed sacks with smirks on their faces, and drove to the field in a silence that tasted like cold iron. The first blow of the shovel against the frozen earth sent a shock up her arms and into her clenched jaw. The ground was unyielding, the temperature biting, but she drew the line of the foundation anyway.
You promised me this land would never break us. I am going to keep that promise.
Autumn hardened in early winter. Day after day, the trench grew longer, a scar cut into the stubborn earth by will alone. Her palms blistered, then tore, then bled. She bound them in strips of old flannel and kept digging. Around town, the talk was grim. The widow Hall had buried her sense in that frozen pit.
But every time I close my eyes, I see him reading that manual by the stove. This hole isn't a grave. It's the start of a promise.
Some afternoons, David would slow his truck on the county road, engine idling as he studied her like an accountant, measuring a loss.
He's waiting for me to quit. He can wait forever.
December brought iron-hard frost. The shovel rang like a bell against the frozen crust, and every inch was won from a ground that seemed to hate her. Her hands were wrecked, calloused, split, wrapped in rags, but the trench now reached her waist.
Just a little more. The wall is here. I can feel the weight of the glass before it's even up.
By mid-December, the foundation was cut, a deep rectangle gouged from the frozen field. She stood at its edge, spent but still standing. The lumber arrived on a flatbed the week before Christmas, and Rebecca unloaded it alone, plank by frozen plank. Day by day, the frame rose from the foundation, a skeleton of pine against the white sky. She worked from first light until her hands could no longer grip the hammer.
Jack, you'd be up here with me, swearing at every crooked nail. I can almost hear you.
David drove past once, slowed to a crawl. Through the open window, he called out,
Nice birdhouse, widow. Hope you kept the receipt.
Let him talk. The glass goes in tomorrow. Then we'll see who's frozen out.
She installed the glass panels herself, carefully angling them south just as the old manual directed. The thermal mass, black barrels of water, lined the north wall. Inside, the soil beds were dark and rich, waiting. She knelt and pressed the first lettuce seeds into the cold earth, her breath clouding the air.
Grow. Please. Prove them all wrong. Prove he was right.
By New Year's Eve, the greenhouse stood complete, a defiant rectangle of glass and timber glowing faintly in the winter dusk. The real cold hadn't even begun. By mid-January, the first pale lettuce leaves unfurled in the warm hum of the greenhouse. Rebecca knelt and pressed the soil probe deep, 58 degrees, steady as a heartbeat. Outside, the weather radio whispered of a cold anomaly building over Canada, a polar cold front dropping south.
Polar what? Hoop houses have stood for 40 years. This is just January.
Marcus nodded along, but Rebecca felt a twist in her stomach that had nothing to do with the temperature.
Jack used to say storms don't ask permission, they arrive.
That evening, she pored over the manual's margin notes, reinforced the glazing, checked the barrel seals. By the end of the week, the forecast hardened into a word no farmer wanted to hear: polar vortex.
If it gets as cold as they say, nothing out there will survive.
But inside, the lettuce grew, oblivious to the dread gathering outside. At 6 a.m., the alert screamed across every phone in the county. Polar vortex warning. Wind chills to -40. 10 days. Farmers scrambled to tighten plastic on their hoop houses, stack straw bales, and offer prayers that felt too thin. On the co-op board, David posted a photo of his hoop house. The caption read, "Built to last."
Worst case, I lose a few rows. Not a whole winter.
Rebecca read the alert and felt a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. She walked the length of the greenhouse, counting water barrels, tracing the glazing seals like a nurse checking a patient.
Everything is as ready as I can make it. But ready enough?
Outside, the wind began to rise, a low moan that promised worse to come. She lit the lantern and sat on the wooden crate, watching the thermometer needle refuse to move.
Hold. Just hold through this.
The vortex hit at midnight with a scream that shook the glass in its frames. Inside, Rebecca pulled the blanket tighter, eyes fixed on the mercury.
58. You beautiful, stubborn old manual. It's holding.
She slept in 20-minute bursts, each time waking to check, and each time the needle hadn't moved. By dawn, the wind had teeth. She unlatched the door and stepped into a world glazed in ice. Across the county road, the plastic on Tom Pruitt's hoop house flapped in tatters. David stood at his own, hands on hips, glaring at a sagging frame.
Nothing a little duct tape won't fix. This isn't over.
Rebecca said nothing. She just turned and walked back to the greenhouse, where the thermometer still read 58.
One night down. 9 more to go.
The ice on the glass was already an inch thick, but inside, the lettuce still grew. The cold did not relent. By the third morning, the temperature had sunk another 10 degrees, and the wind carried the sound of things breaking. David's hoop house buckled at the center beam. Plastic tore with a sound like a zipper gone wrong, and the cold poured in.
3 years of work. 3 years.
Marcus found his entire crop of winter spinach frozen solid, the leaves shattering under his boots like green glass.
I told David this cold was different. I told him.
By the 5th day, every hoop house in the county had either collapsed or gone silent. Only one structure still glowed at dusk. Inside, Rebecca moved through the rows with a harvest basket, the lettuce leaves crisp and perfect against her scarred palms.
It's not fair. Mine is alive, and theirs are dead. Why do I feel ashamed of being right?
She filled the basket, then another, the weight of survival pressing heavy in her chest. Outside, the world was a frozen graveyard. Inside, the greenhouse hummed with a warmth that felt almost traitorous. On the 10th morning, the sky cleared to a brittle, aching blue. The temperature at sunrise was -42, but the wind had gone still. David and Marcus stood in the ruins of their hoop house, shoveling ice from twisted frames. Neither spoke. There was nothing left to say.
It's all dead. Every row. I should have listened.
Across the county, the same scene repeated. Men in heavy coats walking through fields of shattered plastic and frozen soil. At the Callaway farm, Rebecca pushed open the greenhouse door and stepped into a world turned to crystal. Behind her, the warm breath of the greenhouse spilled out, fogging instantly in the knife-edge cold. Inside, 58 degrees. Outside, a grave.
I did it. Your design held, Jack, but I never wanted to be the only one standing.
A pickup slowed on the county road. The driver stared at the glowing greenhouse, then pulled out a phone. The calls would start soon. Rebecca's own phone buzzed in her pocket, a message from the county hospital. She didn't read it yet, just stood there, feeling the weight of the living at her back. The sun climbed higher, and the ice began to drip, but nothing else moved in the silent fields, except the whisper of her name on the wind. By the following week, the greenhouse floor was a sea of green. Rebecca filled basket after basket with butter lettuce, her back aching but her heart pounding with a fierce kind of pride. Her phone began to ring, and this time she answered. The voice on the other end was clipped, professional, desperate.
Yes, this is Rebecca Hall. I have lettuce. A lot of it. How much do you need?
The county hospital administrator arrived within the hour, walking the rows like a pilgrim in a cathedral. She bought every head Rebecca could spare. Before noon, a regional grocery chain called. They'd pay triple the winter rate. Rebecca held the phone against her chest and allowed herself one shaking breath.
Jack, you'd laugh to see this. The joke we planted is feeding the whole county.
Days later, a refrigerated truck backed up to the greenhouse. Workers loaded crates of butter lettuce labeled with her farm's name, Hall Family Farm. The contract she signed that afternoon brought in more money than the insurance check ever did. Her grief project had become a business.
I wanted to prove him right. I didn't expect to end up alone at the top of a frozen world.
Outside, the town was still buried in loss. Inside, Rebecca Hall had become the only source of life for 200 miles. In the frozen wreckage of the hoop house, David and Marcus worked in grim silence, shoveling ice that had already claimed its victory. But they had heard the rumors now about the contracts, the truck deliveries, the prices.
Triple the winter rate, they say, for lettuce. And we've got nothing but frozen mud.
It'll melt. All of it. We rebuild.
But his hands gripped the handle until his knuckles went white. He wasn't thinking about rebuilding. He was thinking about rebuilding. He was thinking about the greenhouse he'd called a rich girl tomb. That afternoon, Rebecca loaded her pickup with crates of lettuce she'd set aside, not for sale, but for the county food bank. She didn't make a show of it. She just drove. When she pulled up to the distribution center, the volunteers stared. They took the boxes with murmured thanks, but their eyes held a question they didn't ask.
They're hungry, and they still won't look at me. I am both their salvation and their mirror.
On the county road, David's truck passed hers. For a second, their eyes met through the frosted windows. Neither waved, neither stopped. The silence between them was a living thing, a debt unspoken, a pride too brittle to bend. And in that silence, the county waited.
He won't ask. He'll freeze before he asks. And I don't know if I am ready for that either.
3 days later, the crunch of tires on frozen gravel pulled Rebecca to the greenhouse door. David Morrow's truck idled in the snow, and the man himself stood beside it, hat in hand.
Rebecca, I know I am the last person you want to see, but the co-op needs what you know.
The co-op? The same co-op that called this a rich girl tomb?
I was wrong, flat wrong. Your greenhouse is standing, and mine is wreckage. Show us how you did it, please.
The word please seemed to cost him something. Rebecca studied his face, searching for the smirk that was no longer there.
He's desperate. But is he remorseful? Or just hungry? I'll consider it. That's all I can give you right now.
David's jaw tightened, but he nodded. He turned and walked back to his truck without another word, the crunch of his boots sharp in the silence. As the taillights receded, Rebecca leaned against the doorframe. She wanted to believe his humility was real, but the memory of the backhoe refusal still cut.
Jack, what would you do? Forgive or remember.
Later that night, unable to sleep, Rebecca climbed the attic stairs to the cardboard boxes labeled Jack's things. She hadn't opened them since the funeral. Inside the first box, beneath a stack of seed catalogs, she found a leather notebook she'd never seen before. The pages were filled with Jack's handwriting, sketches for a passive solar greenhouse, detailed to the last bolt, dated 2 winters before his death. Then a passage near the end. Took the plan to the co-op today. David laughed, said it was women's work, not real farming, told me to stick to tractors.
He tried. He tried to build this, and David crushed him.
Her hands shook as she turned the page. There, in smaller writing, maybe he's right, let it go.
Jack never let go of things, unless they hurt too much to hold. David did that to him.
She read the final entry. Rebecca loves the idea. Maybe one day, but not now. Not against that wall.
That wall was David, and I am the one who finally broke through it. He humbled himself to ask for my help, but he never humbled himself to Jack. That debt is still unpaid.
She turned back to the earlier pages. Month after month, Jack had written in the neat, hopeful script of a man building a future, budgets, glass thicknesses, heat loss formulas, an entry from 26 months ago. Saved enough for the south-facing glass. Next spring, we break ground. Rebecca's going to cry when she sees the first lettuce.
He saved. He planned. He believed. And then he walked into David's office and had it ripped out of his hands.
She could see it now. The winter afternoon, Jack walked into the co-op, the rolled plans under his arm, the careful hope in his posture, and the way David barely looked up.
You are serious. That's women's work, Jack. Stick to what you know.
The other farmers had laughed too. Jack had rolled up his plans and left without a word.
He died thinking his dream was a joke. Because of David.
She closed the notebook and set it on the attic floor. Then she stood, walked to the kitchen table, and pulled out a blank invoice pad.
He wants to learn? Fine. But first, he'll pay for the lesson he gave Jack.
The pen moved across the paper. Backhoe lease, denied. Interest, accrued. A debt, 2 winters old. She wrote the final number at the bottom and drew a heavy line beneath it. Then she photocopied the page from Jack's notebook, the one where David's insult burned in ink. The invoice and the notebook page lay side by side, a bill of sale and a bill of wrongs.
This isn't about money. It's about the words he said to my husband. Money is just the only language David understands.
She picked up her phone and typed a message to David. Come to the greenhouse tomorrow morning. I have your answer.
He'll come. His pride is freezing, and I am the only one with heat.
She folded the bill and the notebook page into her coat pocket, then walked out to the greenhouse. The night was clear and bitter, the stars sharp as glass. Inside the greenhouse, the lettuce was knee-high, a silent congregation of green. She stood among the rows, letting the warmth settle the tremor in her hands.
Jack, this is for you. Not revenge, reckoning.
She laid the bill and the photocopy on the old wooden crate she used as a table, then placed the leather notebook on top, a monument to a debt finally being called in. She waited in the warm glow, watching the door, the weight in her pocket now transformed into a reckoning she was ready to deliver. The greenhouse door scraped open, and David stepped inside, his breath fogging in the sudden warmth. He saw the crate, the notebook, the bill, and his face went still.
You wanted to know how I did it, David. Start here.
Took the plan to the co-op today. David laughed, said it was women's work, not real farming, told me to stick to tractors. David's jaw slackened. The words seemed to reach across 2 winters and strike him in the chest.
I didn't know he wrote it down. I never thought he'd take it that hard.
He died thinking his dream was a joke. So yes, I'll teach you. But first, you pay for what you took from him.
She slid the invoice across the crate. Backhoe lease, denied. Interest accrued, a number that could have been a ransom.
The lessons start when your check clears. Not a moment before.
David stared at the paper. Then, with a hand that trembled only a little, he pulled out his checkbook and wrote. He slid the check across the crate, the ink still wet. Rebecca didn't smile, didn't soften, she just nodded once, and the debt was acknowledged. The morning the check cleared, Rebecca sent a single text. First lesson, Wednesday dawn. When she opened the door, they were there. David, Marcus, 3 others, hats in hand.
Come in. Don't touch the lettuce.
The warmth hit them like a wall, and for a moment they just stared at the green rose, their faces unreadable.
This is the thermal mass, black barrels filled with water. They absorb heat during the day and release it at night. No fuel, no fans.
Water. That's it?
Water. And the angle of the glass, 35 degrees south. Same design my husband drew 2 winters ago.
David's head dipped lower over his notepad. Marcus cleared his throat but said nothing else.
You need a trench deeper than the frost line, gravel for drainage, and barrels touching at the north wall. Write it down.
They wrote. For the first time in that greenhouse, the only sound was the scratch of pencils and the soft hum of a world that had refused to die. The lesson stretched until the sun climbed high, and the men who had mocked her sat like students before a teacher they could no longer afford to ignore. Within a fortnight, the first frame rose on David Morrow's land. The glass angled south exactly as taught. Exactly as taught.
Marcus, that glass needs to be 35 degrees. Didn't you write it down?
Rebecca watched from her own greenhouse window, the ghost of a smile touching her lips.
They're not just building greenhouses, they're building apologies.
Week by week, more frames went up. The county began to look like a glass city rising from the snow. On a shelf inside, Jack's leather notebook lay open beside a small lettuce seedling, a silent testament.
He wrote that entry 2 winters ago. Now it's coming true.
She closed the notebook, then looked out at the new frames, standing where once there had been only wreckage. By spring, 5 passive solar greenhouses stood in the county, each one built from the manual Jack had hidden in his truck. And at the center, Rebecca Hall's original greenhouse glowed, no longer alone. One evening, Rebecca stepped outside carrying 2 woven baskets of butter lettuce, the weight familiar now against her palms. Behind her, the greenhouse glowed golden against the violet dusk, and farther back, where wreckage once lay, new glass glittered.
This is what he wanted. Not just lettuce, but a community that could survive.
She set the baskets down and looked out at the changed horizon, where the frozen graveyard had become a glass city.
He said the land couldn't be the only thing that holds your heart. It isn't anymore.
In the distance, David's greenhouse caught the last light, and Marcus was hauling water barrels inside. The men who had mocked her grief project now fed their families from the same design. She didn't need an apology anymore. The glass standing against the cold was enough.
We did it, Jack. You and me.
She picked up the baskets and walked toward the new frames, carrying the first harvest into a world she had taught to grow. Later, she stood inside her own greenhouse, the baskets emptied. The shelves silent, she opened the leather notebook to the page she knew by heart. She placed it beside a new seedling, a tiny lettuce plant just breaking through the dark soil.
Thank you for the dream. It's real now.
Outside, snow began to fall again. Soft, steady, harmless. The glass held its warmth against the night. She looked at the notebook. No longer a wound, but a compass. It had guided her through the coldest winter of her life.
I'll leave it here. For whoever needs it next.
She turned back to the rose, her hands moving through the familiar work, her mind finally quiet. The grief had not vanished, but it had found a place. The seedling beside the notebook stretched toward the light, oblivious to the snow piling on the glass above.
One day, someone will open that notebook and see your handwriting. They'll know it's possible.
The snow continued to fall, but inside, the thermometer held steady at 58 degrees, and the green grew on. By the time spring thawed the last frost, 6 passive solar greenhouses stood across the county, each angled south, each filled with green. Rebecca Hall stood on the porch of the farmhouse, a mug of coffee warming her hands, and watched the refrigerated truck roll down the drive. The crates inside carried her lettuce. Yes, but also a story of a manual in a truck, a notebook in an attic, and a winter that taught a county how to grow. The old co-op was quiet now. The hoop house ruins finally cleared. David's greenhouse had produced its first harvest, and Marcus was already planning another. Rebecca walked down the path between the glass houses, her boots pressing into softening earth. The sound of a tractor hummed in the distance, not a threat, but a promise. She paused at the door of her original greenhouse, the one she'd dug by hand, the one they'd called a tomb. She placed her palm against the glass, warm, alive, still holding at 58 degrees, and allowed herself a full breath. The camera pulled back slowly, rising above the farm. The greenhouses became a constellation of glass sprinkled across the valley. A single truck, loaded with fresh greens, wound along the county road, heading for the hospital, the grocery, the tables of the people who had once laughed. And there, at the center of the valley, a young widow's grief project still glowed, teaching the land a lesson it would never forget.